Hi, Jody here from Healing Journey. So I have been absent for a while from Facebook Lives. So just a little update on why that's the case. So I have been doing a lot of work on a new online program that I'm building called Gut Instinct, which is going to be a lot more financially accessible for people that don't want to do a dive into my consultation program. So I'm really excited about that program. So I've been working on a lot of content creation, and that's taken up a lot of my time. Almost done it, the content creation part, so it should be live in the next couple of months, which is really exciting. I've also been doing a lot of training. Lots of training going on thyroid, lots of training going on hair, tissue, and mineral analysis. I'm kind of a bit of a mineral nerd now. So lots of exciting stuff happening. So wanted to let you know that I did the draw. Accidentally posted the draw in my community. So if you're in my community, the group, you can see the draw live. But the winner is, drumroll, Janine eBay. I'm not sure if I'm saying the last name properly, but she is the winner of a free HTMA. And this draw, again, is from the live event that I did. I was part of a health fair, and I was giving away a free hair, tissue, and mineral analysis test. So this is one of my favorite tests. Why is it one of my favorite tests? Because it provides a lot of information about mineral status. And for me, when I started to supplement for the mineral status that it was showing up on my test, I actually started to see pretty immediate results. And that's why I really like this, because it gives you a lay of the land. It gives you a bit of an idea of whether you're getting exposure to different metals. It also will give you a sense of whether you're copper toxic, and we tend to see a specific copper toxic mineral pattern. And it's going to let you know if you have a calcium shell, what your calcium is doing. It's also going to tell you a lot about just overall function of minerals in your body. So I actually have one here for you. So we're going to take a look at that. Just give me a second here to set that up. So here we go. So you can see here, let me see, technical difficulties, yes. All right, I think we're good. So you can see here, quite a few things. So the first thing I want to point out, see this cobalt, it's sky high. So this gives me a sense of whether or not I'm absorbing B12, which, you guessed it, I'm not. How do we know this from cobalt? Cobalt is part of B12. And so when B12 is not being properly absorbed, it shows up very high on an HTMA. And I actually suspected this was going to happen. It hadn't happened on previous tests, and I was kind of surprised, actually. I know genetically that I have the FUT2 gene, which prevents me from absorbing B12 very well at all. And I also have been taking supplemental forms of it instead of sublingual form, and so that's probably creating to this cobalt toxicity that I'm seeing here. What else is this telling me? I am copper toxic, so I've known this for a while. It can take a year or two or more to get rid of copper that's in your system. So I've been dumping copper for quite a while, actually. And my copper toxicity is actually caused because of parasites. And so I've been working on clearing out parasites for quite a while. And it's an ongoing process for me. So the parasites are causing a low level of zinc, and they probably have. I've been sick for years, so they've probably been creating low levels of zinc for quite a while, and that's been creating copper toxicity. So copper is being stored in my body. So we're talking like 11 years of copper toxicity, and so now we're starting to dump the copper out, and you can see that here. This is a pretty significant copper dump. So you can see these are my old test results. So I'm seeing more copper coming out now, and I can feel it. So how do you know that you're copper toxic? So you can actually go to coppertoxic.com, but for me, I experienced extreme anxiety. And it's kind of, interesting in that it's not necessarily related to a specific event. It's just experience of like physiological anxiety. And that's when a copper dump is happening. The dumps will happen in waves. It's kind of like a bit of a roller coaster. So that is what this test is telling me here. And so this zinc actually probably represents a loss of zinc from my body. So copper is going to pull the zinc out with it. What else can I tell from this? So I can see that my calcium is in my soft tissue. This is not where we want it to be. So calcium, the average, what we want it to be at is 40, and I'm at 122. And this is actually a huge improvement for me. The first test that I did, I was at 185, so this was off the charts high. And so you might be thinking, okay, what's the big deal? Calcium's, high. Don't we want calcium to be high? We want strong bones, that kind of thing. So what this is telling me is that my calcium is not where it belongs. It's in my soft tissue. And I don't want my calcium in my soft tissue. I want it in my bones. So because I'm copper toxic, it's actually pulling out the calcium from my bones and it's being deposited in my soft tissue. So what does it feel like when calcium's in your soft tissue? So sometimes it's achy joints. Sometimes it's achy soft tissue. And what actually will happen if you have really high levels of calcium in your soft tissue is it's going to start to calcify your organs. It's going to calcify your arteries. It's going to cause lots of problems. This is because calcium, A, it's a dumb mineral. It doesn't go where it's supposed to go. It kind of goes with the flow. And B, it's a very sharp mineral. So that's why it's going to cause this pain when it's in your soft tissue where it doesn't belong. So there's a huge misconception here, and the misconception is, okay, you know what, if I take vitamin D, that's going to improve my calcium. So what vitamin D is actually doing is it's improving your calcium retention, but it's not necessarily directing calcium to where it belongs. So oftentimes you'll see people who take vitamin D, their calcium is sky high in their soft tissue. So then the question becomes for me, if the calcium is sky high in your soft tissue, then what's in your bones? And what tends to happen is your body's going to grab onto anything it can take to replace that missing mineral. And usually, unfortunately, it is actually going to be metals. And so what typically happens is the bones will pull onto lead. Lead's going to sit there in place of the calcium. So you have to take the calcium and put it back into the bones, and then your body's going to start detoxing lead. And so I actually use an MK7 to direct the calcium to go where it's supposed to, and that will start to direct the calcium back into the bones. So over time, I'm seeing my calcium shell decrease. The other thing that happens with the calcium shells, you can become extremely emotionally numb, which I definitely was. So it's kind of like I wouldn't say depression necessarily, but you're just not interested in stuff that you used to be interested in before. So things that get you excited, you're just kind of like apathetic. And part of this is the calcium is going to form that shell, and it's going to block nutrients from getting in and out of your cells. And our body emotionally kind of mirrors that. So very interesting when we think about the calcium shell. Flipping back here, you can see, so there's metals that are being released. So some of this is because I'm taking binders to pull metals out of my body. And some of this I've actually just switched over to a shower filter because our waters sometimes have metals in them. I've done mineral tests with people where you can see, their metals here. Mimic the water testing metals that showed up. So someone had a well water. She had high uranium in her well water and high uranium, surprise, surprise, on her hair tissue and mineral analysis. So this tends to tell me where we're getting exposure from and what the body is kind of processing out. So even though mine aren't high, we actually don't want to see anything on here. So there's some stuff going on with aluminum and my lead, which is probably because my calcium is starting to go down. You can see lots of different things, and sometimes it's a good indication of if you're getting recent exposure. Okay, so I'm not going to go over everything today, but the other thing I just want to point out and what I like to look at are these ratios here. So typically we want to see our ratios kind of in the middle here. So you can see that I still have a little bit of work to do, and mineral balancing is one of those things that it takes time. So I'm seeing improvements, but I'm also copper dumping, which is sending my mineral pattern a little bit skewy. But what can I tell? I can tell from this that my thyroid needs some help. And I'm actually in the process of giving it help. So my thyroid markers were subclinically low. And so I kind of knew that it needed help. So I'm working on an iodine protocol, which is a whole other Facebook Live. The other thing I can see from here is that, my stress ratio, I'm not going to handle stress very well because this is my mineral balance for stress ratios. And if we go back up here, we can kind of see, I don't have a lot of potassium at all. And so it's, and sodium, and these are kind of going to be the first responders to stress. So not surprising. And then adrenal wise, oh dear, not a lot going on with the adrenals that are positive. And again, this isn't a surprise, because I'm copper dumping. Copper is going to be very stimulating to the adrenals. And oftentimes it will burn the adrenals out as you're copper dumping. So it's going to be really important for me to continue to support my minerals, to help my body to detox this copper in a healthy and supported way. Okay. And then the other thing that's really interesting that I like to look at is this lovely copper molybdenum ratio. So molybdenum actually clears the blood of copper. And so when you have copper dumping, often the ratio of copper to molybdenum isn't that great. So I'm actually supporting myself with molybdenum right now to help me through this copper dump. So you can see my old results were super high. And these ones are coming down a little bit. But what we tend to see with people that have this copper molybdenum balance is we tend to see a chemical sensitivity when it's really, really high. And when it's above, I think, 650 is kind of what we're expecting. Maybe that says 625. I can't really read it. But we want to see it at about 650. That's obviously not, mine's way higher than that. And I do experience sensitivity to smell. So it's not surprising to me. And so if you're one of those people who also has sensitivity to smell, then chances are this ratio is off. So who else can be copper toxic? So if you've been on the pill for a couple of years, chances are you're copper toxic. So reviewed test for a lot of women. And, I kind of see this copper toxic pattern, and then I review their intake form, and lo and behold, they've been on the pill for, 4, 5, 18 years, or they've been on the copper IUD, I think. And I was one of these people as well that thought, copper IUD, it's not hormonal, it's got to be better for me. And I wasn't aware of, copper toxicity at the time. And a lot of women with copper IUDs, they'll start to see their mood kind of go a bit haywire. And that's because their body's becoming copper toxic. So how does a pill do this? So with the pill, the progestin in your birth control pill, the body doesn't see it as progesterone, but the estrogen in the pill, the body sees as estrogen. So then you get this confusing thing where the body kind of becomes estrogen dominant. And when you're estrogen dominant, high levels of estrogen is going to promote storage of copper in your tissues. Okay. So when you get storage of copper in your tissues, it promotes more estrogen, which promotes more storage of copper in your tissues. And so you're going through your life collecting copper. So then I get people that say, hey, I'm off the pill. I must not be copper toxic. So when you're a slow oxidizer, so this is something you can learn from the test as well. I'm a slow oxidizer right now. When your body's in a slow oxidative state, you're not going to release those hormones or those metals at all. Your body's going to hold on to the metals. So if you're copper toxic, you're in a slow oxidative state, very likely. And so you're not going to naturally release that. So you have to start to stimulate the mineral balancing. And as you're stimulating the mineral balancing, as we can see with me, you're going to start to see some of those minerals start to dump. The metals and the copper start to release. So the older you get, actually, this is why I think a lot of women are more anxious the older they get, because this copper is still being retained in their body. The other challenge with copper is that you can dump it into the fetus. So if you're super copper toxic, you have a child, why are we seeing heightened levels of anxiety in our kids? Because we're seeing heightened levels of copper toxicity in women in general, right? And nobody is talking about this. Well, there's some. It's starting to bubble now. People are starting to become aware. But this is why I really, really like the HTMA, because copper toxicity can be such a huge piece of people's health and people's mental health. It's also going to play in how you're able to digest. I love talking about digestion, and definitely the minerals play a huge role in this, because copper is going to cause a mineral pattern that's going to really prevent stomach acid production. And when you have low stomach acid production, you have a whole host of gut issues. So it sort of starts to ricochet. So this is why I really like the HTMA. It is a journey when you're doing it. And the idea is we want to get you into a faster oxidative state so we can pull those metals a lot faster. That's the ideal. You can also tell thallium toxicity. I'm not going to show you that today, but you can use some of the codes here to see if you're thallium toxic. I am thallium toxic, and that's because I have low potassium. So I have low potassium, my body goes, again, like it does with the lead or with the calcium, I need something. And so it starts to click onto thallium. So you might think like, hey, I'm not working in a heavy metal industry. Where am I going to get this from? So what they've done is they've replaced the lead and gas with thallium. And so thallium is everywhere. So if you're low in potassium, guess what? You're probably high in thallium. What thallium does is it sits on the sodium potassium transporter, okay? Sits there. And then guess what? If you have potassium in your food or whatever, if you are eating kind of like typical levels of potassium in your foods, it's still not enough to push that thallium off. You need kind of high doses to push the thallium off the receptors, so that the potassium can get in and then it can get into your cells. But the thallium will sit there and block the potassium from getting into your cells. And then you're going to feel exhausted. And so when you feel exhausted, obviously that's where we're starting to get the chronic fatigue. That's where we're starting to get a lot of those other issues, because we're just so tired because we can't get those nutrients, those minerals into our cells where we need them to be. So huge game changer doing an HTMA, which is why I gave it away for free. So if you have any questions, would love to hear from you. Any experiences with HTMAs, would love to hear from you. Other than that, have a happy Friday.